Hello, friends, and let's get started.
Blake had always differed from his wife in his calm, judicious approach to life. He did not like unnecessary noise, too loud company, excessive drinking. He valued order, moderation, good music, and dinner in a small circle of close friends. Jessica, on the contrary, always wanted a holiday. She was drawn to the new, to fun parties where you can shine yourself in your outfits. And for the seventh year, this contrast in their personalities both attracted and distanced them from each other. Sometimes they managed to find a balance, but lately Blake felt like they were drifting further apart. When they'd receive an invitation to a country party from a couple of their longtime acquaintances, Trevor and Rachel, Blake had only grimaced. He remembered the couple's previous flings, the pool, the endless alcohol, the open flirtation between the guests. All of this he saw as liberties that crossed the line. So when he saw the message on his phone, he raised his eyebrows and muttered, "I don't think we need this. Do we, Jess? We got a lot to do." To which Jessica, with excited eyes, turned around dramatically. "I know, but it's a great chance for a change of scenery. We've been working so hard, you in the office, me with my projects. We need to get away, don't we?" It was getting harder and harder to argue with her lately. She had a knack for finding arguments. "I haven't seen Trevor and Rachel in a while. All my friends will be there. It's just a weekend," and so on. Blake couldn't get past her enthusiasm, but the premonition that the evening might turn out to be something unpleasant hadn't left him the minute he'd heard the word party. On the eve of the trip, he caught himself spending too much time at the closet, going through outfits and lingerie. She was excitedly changing lingerie options in front of the mirror, as if she were preparing for a fashion show or, worse, a hunt, rather than a relaxing outing. Blake asked himself why she was so concerned about her appearance. In a country house with a barbecue and a pool, was it all that important? But Jessica was on a high, as if anticipating something exciting. Sinking into the chair across from her, he asked, "You do realize that this isn't just going to be a sit-down, but a large-scale drinking party, don't you?" She replied with a slight smile. "Honey, I know you don't like noise, but I promise this is just a way to shake things up. I'm not going to get into anything like that if you're afraid." She said this with a slight sneer in her gaze, as if she thought her husband's fears were exaggerated. But Blake really couldn't shake the feeling that something was going to go wrong. He watched the smooth movements with which Jessica adjusted her underwear, checking the way it fit, and realized that somehow she was determined to be as seductive as possible. Perhaps she just wanted to be the most flamboyant woman at the party. In a way, it was her usual trait to be liked by the audience. But this time it seemed to Blake that she was preparing herself for something new, something he didn't know, and it made him uncomfortable. And so they were on their way out of town. The weather was mild. The sun was slowly sinking, the air warm but not stuffy. The road leading to Trevor and Rachel's country house winded through the trees. The house was quite secluded, behind a high fence. When the gate swung open, Blake saw several parked cars in the courtyard, heard distant laughter and music blaring from the windows. The couple entered the house and were immediately greeted by Trevor and Rachel. Smiling broadly and clearly already drunk, they invited the guests into the spacious living room with a high ceiling and panoramic windows overlooking the pool. The atmosphere was light, casual, but Blake noticed many of the people present looking at each other with a hint of flirtation. Some were already swimming in the pool. Others were having a drink at the bar. The further the evening went, the more acutely Blake felt like he was an extra here. He didn't know what to talk about with these advanced people who didn't seem to need any barriers. They touched each other lightly, hinting at communication beyond mere friendship. Blake saw women hugging each other when they met and walking away laughing toward the steam room, men playfully slapping their thighs, jokes growing bolder as the alcohol flowed. And then he noticed that Jessica was already chatting with Mark, a stately, muscular guy who'd always had a certain swagger. Mark was laughing, occasionally touching her elbow, leaning closer, whispering something. Blake didn't like the look in his eyes. He was looking at Jessica as if he knew she was his. When Blake approached, trying to make his presence known, Mark nodded with a sort of smirk, letting him know that jealousy was useless. Blake asked his wife, "Is everything okay? Do you want to walk with me?" She only smiled. Yes, of course. but I'll talk to Mark. He's talking about a new business project. Blake felt a slight shiver inside. He didn't want to show his displeasure publicly, but somewhere in the back of his mind, he knew he'd better get her away from this guy. Swallowing a lump in his throat, he stepped back to the bar, grabbed himself a beer, and tried to observe the situation from the sidelines. But he had the heavy feeling that the ground was slipping away from under his feet. As Blake sat in a chair by the window, he watched the company partying. They drank cold punch, sparkling wine, and all manner of cocktails mixed generously with rum, gin, and tequila. Loud laughter, multiple voices. Girls in bathing suits were running to the pool, splashing. Then someone called them to the steam room. Soon men were crawling out of the steam room, wrapped in towels, half naked, with flushed faces. The jacuzzi, the billiard room, and the upstairs rooms were all at the guest's disposal. Jessica was already drinking her second or third cocktail when Blake came up to her and said quietly, "I think you've had enough. Don't overdo it." But she shook out her hair and replied, "Oh, come on. Why do you try to control me every time? I want to rest, you know that. We're here for fun." And then Mark came along. "Come on, Blake. Don't be a boo-boo. Let your wife go have some fun," he said with a grin. Blake immediately felt a surge of irritation. He wanted to say, "Shut your mouth, buddy, and keep your distance." But instead, he just clenched his jaw. Jessica brushed off her husband's attempt to object. "You always see things that aren't there. Relax," she said, and there was a patronizing tone in her voice, as if she were explaining the rules of life to a child with no brains. An hour or so passed, and the atmosphere became even more playful. Someone suggested that they go into the steam room as a mixed group. Blake, who disliked excessive heat, declined. He stayed in the living room, but after a while he decided to follow what was going on. He saw several men, wrapped in towels, with smiles coming out of the steam room. Following them came the women, in bathing suits or covered by short robes. Jessica was among them, flushed, laughing, as if she were really enjoying the company. She glanced over at Blake, but it was as if she hadn't noticed who he was standing with. In fact, next to him was Laura, one of the few who wasn't part of the rowdy fun. Laura was the wife of another guest, Eric, and was apparently feeling a little out of place as well. "How are you?" Laura asked quietly, and Blake could see the same tension in her eyes. "Trying to keep it together," he answered briefly. "These parties are getting more and more." She hesitated, searching for the word, "free, you know? They used to be quieter." Blake only grinned crookedly. He could really feel these people crossing boundaries, and he saw Mark around Jessica all the time. Just then, one of the guests shouted out with a laugh, "Come on, everybody to the table. It's about to be." He paused, shaking his head. "A new game. Did someone really invent it? Or is it a prank?" There was a general laughter. New portions of alcohol were poured. The music got louder. A few girls chirped about how great it would be to introduce pair contests, as if it were already part of the planned program. Blake's sense of discomfort was only growing, but he didn't yet suspect what exactly was about to be played. When someone Blake didn't catch who exactly shouted out, "How about, let's play a game of blind pair swap, just for laughs." The atmosphere in the living room was already heated by alcohol and the general mood. People were laughing, clapping their hands, throwing in crazy ideas, some shouting that it was overkill, and some with a wink suggesting to clarify the rules. In a nutshell, the gist of this joke game boiled down to the following. Everyone closes their eyes or draws lots to choose a new partner for an hour or two, as if for conversation, for flirting, for fun, but no one is obliged to, you know? All this was served up under the sauce of just for fun, no real cheating, and let it be an innocent prank. "I think I'll pass," Blake said, trying to keep his cool when, out of the noise, he was suddenly asked if he wanted to participate. But Jessica suddenly grinned and raised her eyebrows. "Wait, what if we just check it out? What would it be like?" "Well, purely as a joke. What's the big deal?" Of course, the whole group immediately chimed in. "Come on, don't slow down, Blake. Relax." For a split second, he wanted to grab his wife by the arm and take her out of this house at once. But he realized that to make a scene in front of so many people would be to make a fool of himself. And Jessica was looking at him as if she were defying him. Her gaze was a gleam of courage and curiosity. He was worried, Was she really playing with fire now, not realizing the consequences? I still don't see the point, he muttered, feeling himself grow cold inside. It's a joke, relax. Jessica repeated. Suddenly, to his horror, she was the first to pull a slip of paper with a name on it out of her hat, which someone had brought. She ran her eyes over it and exclaimed, "Oh, Mark, what a coincidence!" She stretched out the vowels as if she was already anticipating the intrigue. Blake felt a chill go through his chest. He glanced at Mark, who was grinning, biting his lip as if savoring his victory. He didn't have to act surprised. Fate had played into Mark's hands. Or was it on purpose? Blake couldn't understand. But his heart was beating like crazy, and he wanted to exclaim, "What the hell?" Soon everyone was clapping their hands, saying, "Here comes the first couple." Jessica said, "That's it, guys, we're off," by the book, and laughed. There was a hysterical note in her laughter, as if she didn't believe what she was doing. But she went ahead, Mark keeping up. Blake watched her walk past him, frozen for a second as if she were going to say something, but instead she lowered her eyes, put the phone on the edge of the table, and almost imperceptibly turned it off. Why'd she turn it off? And more importantly, why didn't she say a single word to him, to Blake? He was left alone, with a lingering lump in his throat. All around, the roar of laughter continued. Someone was still pulling papers, someone was guffawing, someone was indignant that he didn't want to mess with other people's wives. But Blake couldn't hear or see anyone but the outline of Mark's back and Jessica's hair disappearing behind the door of one of the rooms on the second floor. Time began to flow, somehow, especially slowly. Blake sat down on the couch in the large hallway to wait for the entertainment hour, which was supposed to last a short time. But a quarter of an hour passed, a half hour, an hour. Blake went to the terrace for a smoke. He saw other guests there, heard the splashing of water from a pool. When he returned, he bumped into Laura, who asked quietly, "Where's your wife?" "She's dashed." Blake didn't know what to say. "With Mark, probably over there," and he nodded at the closed hallway door. "It's been an hour," Laura said anxiously. "Maybe she's just chatting with him." "I hope so," Blake squeezed out. A second hour had passed. Blake tried to distract himself by sitting down at the pool table and taking a few shots, but he dropped the cue and cursed. He couldn't concentrate on anything. He went to check Jessica's phone. Maybe she'd left a message on it? But the phone was off, the screen black, no hope. Anxious thoughts succeeded each other. What if she's just messing around? Maybe they're really having fun chatting in the other room. But still, where could this hour for two have gone? Why did it drag on for so long? Why isn't she coming back? Someone passing by laughed, patted Blake on the shoulder. "So how's our game going? Nervous? Relax, they'll be back." Blake only grinned crookedly in response. He didn't want to scandalize, realizing he'd make himself look bad in front of so many people. Jessica would have mocked his jealousy. "There, you're making things difficult again." But the pain and trembling in his hands were becoming intolerable. At one point, he heard laughter behind the wall, rustling. The bed seemed to creak, someone sobbing, or it was muffled moans. His eyes darkened. "Oh my God, is that Jessica?" But he didn't dare go to the door and burst in, as if he was afraid to see the truth. He locked himself in the small bathroom. Standing in front of the mirror, he closed his eyes. His head spun, his pulse pounding in his temples. Every minute felt like an hour. He lost track of time, standing there in the silence, and trying not to go mad with jealousy, with terror, with powerlessness. Laura, seeing that Blake was about to explode, quietly approached him and whispered, "I heard they're in the far room upstairs. There's a jacuzzi tub and another bed. I'm sorry, but I heard their voices." Blake was silent, his features petrified. He didn't want to become the hysterical husband breaking in with a scandal. He felt humiliated, and that humiliation consumed him completely. The third hour passed. Blake stood at the huge panoramic window, watching the couples who appeared and disappeared with his eyes. Some of the guests were no longer interested in anything but their own pleasures. Some didn't care what was going on. Laura threw concerned glances at him from time to time. But no one dared to say out loud that this game was out of control. Exactly 3 hours later, maybe a little more, the door upstairs finally opened, and Blake, as if sensing it, walked slowly along the corridor. Jessica appeared on the stairs. Her hair is wet, There's a blush on her face, and her eyes are hazy. She's in the same clothes as before, but her t-shirt is wrinkled, the bra strap peeking out from under the neckline. Mark wasn't visible behind her. Apparently, he'd stayed in the room. She looked at her husband, as if nothing unusual had happened. She said uncertainly, not even try to justify herself. I'm sorry it took me so long. We were just talking at first, and then we decided to go swimming, and my cell phone was dead. Blake was silent, glaring at her. His chest was seething with anger, bitterness, jealousy, and some strange cold certainty that it was over. Talked for 3 hours? His voice was quiet, but every word sounded like a metallic clang. Well, then we were in the hot tub. See, I'm all wet. She tried to smile, but it was pathetic. Honestly, it was nothing, just relaxing. Looking at her was painful. Her hazy gaze said she'd clearly had too much alcohol and probably more than that. Her cheeks were flaming with a blush, maybe from the hot water, maybe for something else. When she saw that Blake wasn't responding, she reached out to stroke his shoulder, but he didn't budge, pulled away. The movement, as if unintentionally, opened a chasm between them. We need to talk, he said quietly. Let's leave, okay? Jessica replied, averting her eyes meekly. It's really all a bit too much here. Why do we need this? Let's go home. Blake nodded. He didn't yell, didn't throw accusations in his face. He just whispered quietly, pack up. They left without waiting for the others to continue their drinking. Parting words were a stretch. Guys, what are you doing out so early? Trevor shouted, stay. But Blake only shook his head. Jessica, lowering her eyes, was packing her bag. In the car, they sat in stifling silence. Jessica tried several times to say something, but couldn't find the words. Finally, she mumbled, Blake, it's all a silly game. There's nothing to remember. You're exaggerating. Well, we were there, talking, laughing. The hot tub. So what? That's no reason to just. She stammered, realizing she didn't know what to say next. Blake kept his eyes on the road. His face remained impenetrable. He felt a storm inside him, from the urge to shout, how could you? To utter indifference and weariness of this lie. All he could think about was that the turn in their relationship seemed irreversible. Everything he valued had been betrayed in an instant. Are you angry? Blake, please say something. Jessica's voice was almost breaking into a wail. He remained silent. Finally, when they were already driving into town, he said quietly, I get it. All she could answer was a quiet one. What is it? But he was silent again, and she fell silent, realizing that all possible excuses were either useless or humiliating, or both. It was past midnight when they got home. The house greeted them with a cold stillness. Blake, feeling completely drained, walked into the living room, sat on the couch, and stared at the wall. Jessica went to the bathroom, changed into her pajamas, and hesitantly walked out to him. He didn't look at her. I'm sorry, she said faintly. I didn't mean for it to come out like this. It's the evening, the alcohol, the stupid jokes. I don't know. I need time to. Blake didn't answer. He just got up and went into the bedroom, closed the door behind him. That night, they slept apart. She stayed on the couch. And it was the first night they'd slept apart in all their years of marriage. In the morning, Jessica woke up to hear Blake rummaging through the closets and putting something on the floor of the bed. She got up, walked to the bedroom door. She opened it and saw him putting things into a travel bag. Are you leaving? She mumbled. Her heart clenched. Blake didn't turn around. He spoke in a quiet, even voice. No, Jess, you're staying out there in the country, and I'm leaving a place where we're probably not going to get along. She set the cup of coffee on the bedside table, her heart beating so hard it felt like it was going to jump out of her chest. I don't understand. Do you want to take a break? Or are you done? He turned around, and there was a mixture of weariness and hard determination in his eyes. Then he slowly pulled her phone out of his pocket and placed it next to her coffee cup. A photo was open on the screen, a blurry but easily recognizable silhouette of Jessica at the upstairs bedroom door, and a figure next to it that looked like Mark. The door was ajar, warm light pouring in, and the frame captured the exact moment when she reached for him, laughing. The whole thing had been filmed by Laura, who apparently by accident, or not, had caught the whole story on camera. What? Jessica whispered, looking at the photo. It's not what it looks like. Everything is, Blake replied, and I don't need any details. No scandal is going to help. I knew it all before that picture was taken. I just wanted you to know that we don't trust each other anymore. She lowered her eyes, tears welling up in her throat. She might not have realized what had happened that night, but looking at her husband, she could see that he would never be the same again. He was truly walking out of their lives. He zipped up his bag and, without another word, walked down the hall. She rushed to follow. Please, Blake, wait. I'm going crazy. I made a mistake. I'm sorry, please. Let's talk, let's fix this. Her voice was shaking. He stopped on the threshold, turned his head to her, and said quietly, I don't want to live forever in doubt. I'm sorry. She had nothing to answer. She saw in his gaze an icy calmness. The same calmness that speaks of a mortal offense, of a broken heart that can never be repaired. So he left. A few days passed. It was as if the house was empty. Jessica got up in the mornings, automatically made coffee, but realized there was no one to talk to. She tried calling Blake a couple times, wrote long texts. He hadn't responded. She even drove to his office to catch him in the parking lot. He got out of the car, saw her, and turned away without saying a word, just walked past her like she was air. Trevor and Rachel, terrified that they had unwittingly witnessed the destruction of a family, didn't know what to do either. They called Jessica several times, confusedly apologizing for playing dumb, but it made no difference. It was all too late. Mark had tried to text her a couple times, too, but Jessica had shooed his messages away. What was the point of talking to someone who'd ruined her marriage? Or maybe she'd ruined it. She didn't have an answer for that. Blake, meanwhile, had moved into a small rental apartment closer to his work. He immersed himself in his work even more than before, trying to fill the void with things to do. In the evenings, he went to the gym and worked out with weights, exhausting himself to the point of not thinking about the betrayal that had left a deep wound in him. One day, weeks later, he stood in front of the mirror at the gym, flooded with bright light that made all the details protrude sharply. He lifted a heavy barbell, felt his muscles tense, adrenaline run through his body. Putting the barbell on the rack, he pulled back and looked at his reflection. On his face was the calm look of a man who had endured pain and disappointment, but had found a new core inside. He wiped the sweat from his neck, ran a hand through his short hair. There was no more despair in his eyes. There was only a firm determination to move on. Jessica, on the other hand, remained in their old home. Every day, she realized more and more clearly that time would not mend the broken trust so easily. She thought back to that unfortunate evening, the image of her leaving with Mark for that room, the fog in her head from the cocktails, the hot water in the jacuzzi, his touch, and then the devastation on Blake's face when she left. Those images haunted her, repeated in her dreams, tortured her endlessly. Time passed, but no phone calls, no tears, no regrets brought back what was gone. Sometimes she went to the mirror, saw her reflection with wet hair after a shower, and remembered how that night she had come out in front of everyone in the same way and saw her husband's stony face. I figured it out, he said then, and it was as if he had cut off their entire past. She thought that perhaps she had made a mistake then, daring to go wild, or had slacked off because of bad company. But no explanation now could erase the picture of what had happened. At one point, Jessica had even considered moving out, but hadn't. She lived with the memories and the hope that someday things would work out. But every day of silence from Blake spoke for itself. And so the story ended. He started a new life in the city, finding the strength to move forward every day. And she stayed in the old house, with misted eyes, with hair wet with tears, endlessly regretting that one harmless, as it seemed, blind change of couples destroyed their marriage. And nothing could ever fix it again. And that's where today's story ends. Thank you for watching to the end. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like and comment. We'd love to discuss this story with you. See you in the next video.